So Kamala Harris dropped out of the Democratic primary on December 3rd. To many people's surprise, to my surprise, I thought she would hang on at least until Iowa and New Hampshire and may quit after that or shortly after that. Usually it's the more obscure candidates that quit before those first two primaries, and Kamala Harris was far from obscure. She was a well-known individual, at least in this point in the race. And it was just surprising that she didn't hang on longer. Her stated reason was that her campaign was not financially equipped to go on. And to give you further context of just how badly she was doing, she was passed up in her own state, her home state of California, by Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang, who gets virtually ignored by the media, and Harris, who had the opposite effect of being just had so much attention poured onto her, was passed by Andrew Yang. And then Michael Bloomberg, who had just recently entered the race, was already doing better than her nationally. In fact, it was shortly after that reporting that she left. On the heels of that reporting and on the heels of her recent debate. So, why? Why did it happen? It's not unanimous that it was because of racism and sexism, but I do want to talk about that claim that individuals are making that Kamala Harris's campaign failed because she is a black woman. And I understand on the surface, you see Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, who are quite similar. There's certainly more similarities than differences. And you see the media treating them differently. You see Harris being treated more harshly. And then you see Harris's campaign sink, and Buttigieg's campaign, meanwhile, is doing quite well in those first two states of Iowa and New Hampshire. So why? Why were they treated differently? Well, let's look at the various quotes from individuals that are saying it's sexism and racism. This is a tweet from Joyanne Reed. She states, "The reality is that no 2020 candidate is perfect, but the extent to which people, including the media, but also would-be voters, punished and refused to even consider Kamala Harris for flaws she frankly shared with other candidates was telling and depressing." And then on Crystal Ball's online show, I think it's called The Rising, on The Hill, the Hill's online YouTube channel, Ravy Perry, the chair and professor at Howard University, attributed sexism to why Harris lost as well. Now, the rest of the panel really wasn't feeling it, but this is what Ravy Perry had to say.
Well, I would buy that argument to the extent that Pete Buttigieg wasn't still in the race, and Tulsi Gabbard and Deval Patrick and Tom Steyer, all these people that have had a whole history in this campaign of wavering from issue to issue, they simply have not been attacked like Kamala Harris is. One, the problem is she's a woman, and women are still treated horribly in presidential races.
Elizabeth Warren's got the greatest media swing in the history of the planet. And Pete Buttigieg,
you were absolutely right. He is only now starting to face scrutiny. Right. It has been a total love fest. There is no doubt about that.
And many African Americans who simply found Kamala Harris to be objectionable because she had a prosecutor background. And that, in fact, on Black Twitter in particular, was a huge issue that she had throughout the campaign.
Yeah, but Cory Booker's also
yes, but Cory Booker was not attacked because of that, and I think that's partly because she's a woman again.
But he's also failing.
He's also not doing well.
He's still got nothing.
Also, this is an article from the Chicago Tribune from Darlene Glanton. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. And I might be giving more attention to this article than maybe I should, but I feel like it probably wraps up a lot of individuals' sentiment. It reads, "America isn't progressive enough to elect a black woman as head of state any more than it was when Shirley Chisholm ran in 1972. It's questionable whether our country can elect a woman, period. Though we seemed to be headed in that direction 3 years ago with Hillary Clinton, Trump's unexpected victory forced us to take a deep detour that set us back in terms of leveling the playing field for minorities and women in high-stakes elections." And the article states later on, "This is a nation that sees black women as second-class citizens and treats them accordingly. Black women are at the bottom of the barrel on everything. on everything that matters. The unemployment rate for them is nearly double that of white women. When black women do find jobs, they earn significantly less than everybody else. As a result, they are more likely to live in poverty, making their children more vulnerable to societal ills. Even with all that going against them, they refuse to give up. Harris is a sharp, competent, and committed politician who states her values clearly and fights for them ferociously. She would have been a formidable counter to Trump, smart and quick-witted enough to devour him in a debate. And the article continues later on. Neither that nor her stellar political record was enough to garner white people's support. 47 years later, Harris couldn't do it either. Of course, Harris is as qualified as anyone to hold the office, but she couldn't win, not in 2020 America where racism and bigotry is on full display. So you would have no idea that this article mentioned that it did acknowledge the fact that black people did not support Kamala Harris either, because the tone of the article was suggesting her campaign didn't do well because of racism and bigotry, or doing more than suggesting it. It was straightforward saying it. And it even went so far as to draw a connection between black women struggling in America and Kamala Harris's campaign struggling. And, altogether it was a very superficial analysis, and it's not helpful for disenfranchised black women in this country to cry wolf, to allege sexism and racism so casually and without the surgical precision or detail that such an analysis requires. It was all speculative. And let me just show you a video of Kamala Harris also speculating that racism and sexism were why her campaign wasn't doing so well. And she said made these remarks in October.
I have also started to perhaps be more candid, talking about what I describe and what I believe to be the elephant in the room about my campaign.
What is that?
Electability.
What do you mean?
Electability. Essentially, is America ready for a woman and a woman of color to be president of the United States?
America was ready for a black man to be president of the United States.
And this conversation happened for him.
So let me correct myself really quick. She was not speculating that sexism and racism were to blame. She was just being suggestive that may be the case, which there is a difference. She wasn't outwardly saying sexism and racism are to blame, but there was innuendo. She was floating the idea of, are people ready for a black president, which is not irrational. That is not an irrational thought. But she's saying this in the context of the media having early on fawned over her, of a black person being elected president, of a woman winning the popular vote, and her having done very well at one point in the campaign. So for her to make this innuendo is irresponsible and also a superficial way of analyzing the electorate's behavior. So with regard to the electorate's behavior and the swings of their preference towards Harris and then their aversion towards her, to measure that, we're going to look at some polling data. Some of it's from Morning Consult, some of it's from CNN, and most of it's from Quinnipiac. And it measures Harris's favorability from the months of March all the way to just a week and a half shy of when she dropped out. So the first set of data I'm going to show is in regards to the candidate that black people prefer. From a March 6th, 2019 Morning Consult poll, you can kind of see the preference of Biden and Sanders is almost the same. Keep in mind there's a 5% margin of error. So Biden is 32%, Sanders is 28%. And then you can see in third, Kamala Harris has 14%. And she maintains that 14% from April to June. If you were to look at the CNN aggregate polling data, that means an average of the April, May, June data from CNN. So she's maintaining that 14%. And you can see Biden's numbers raised dramatically. I believe that's, he had announced between April and June. Now, you can see that July poll, July 2nd, Kamala Harris's numbers took off like a rocket to 27%. And that's almost surpassing Joe Biden. And since there's a 5% margin of error, you could sort of argue they're on the same level there. And this is on the heels of doing so well in that late June debate. So this poll was taken while the media was in a frenzy about how great Kamala Harris did in that debate and standing up to Joe Biden, who frankly does not have a great record when it comes to race, supporting the policies favored by Strom Thurmond regarding blacks being disenfranchised in regards to busing rights. So you can see from July 2nd to August 6th, her numbers plummeted. She enjoyed a healthy, vibrant rise after that debate and then just sank like a rock in having 1% of support in the black community, and the black electorate went right back to Biden. And those numbers stayed consistent all the way until she dropped out, fluctuating from 1% to 4% to 5%. So she didn't do so hot among black individuals after that scrutiny that came directly following her performance in the late June debate. Late June debate did well performatively. The media loved it. Her numbers rose, and then something happened in July. The scrutiny that followed from the media was severe enough that she didn't survive in the polls. And frankly, not just mainstream media, but social media. Now, let's look at numbers that compare men, women, black, white. So we've already looked at how the percentage of black individuals that supported Kamala Harris in these Quinnipiac polls, but we're going to see if the sexism claim holds true and the racism claim. So July, men 14%, women 24% support Harris, white people 20% support Harris, and black 27% support Harris. And I don't think it's fair to look at this and state, well, that's because of sexism and racism that not as many men and as many white people supported her. Because, some of the reasoning of why those numbers were lower among whites and men, maybe it is because of sexism and racism. But keep in mind, identity politics is so pervasive among the left and among the Democratic Party right now. And I find it's much more credible that more people would be leaning towards Kamala Harris because she is a black individual and because she's a woman who had just now demonstrated in that late June debate that she is a force to be reckoned with, at least based on that late June debate performance. So, which is more true? Are men leaning away from Kamala Harris because she is a woman and because she's black? Or are black women, or blacks and women, leaning toward her more because of her identity? I think it can be tricky trying to weigh which is more true or how true each one of them are. But as I said, identity politics is very pervasive right now, and in fact so pervasive that media is strongly reliant on a candidate's identity, racial, sexual in regards to Pete Buttigieg being gay, and their gender, reliant on these variables with regards to how credible a candidate is. In fact, they always speak of being a white male as a detriment, at least nowadays. So, identity politics, and then consider the fact that maybe people are perceiving the sexism and racism as such potent variables as to why Kamala Harris was doing worse among men and white people, because, frankly, social media can become pretty intense. Just anybody can randomly spout out nonsense. And keep in mind this other variable, which maybe I don't have to mention, but I will. When somebody has disdain towards a female candidate, they will express themselves frequently with language that is sexist. The B word, the C word. So they'll use this sexist language towards someone they have disdain for. But does that mean the disdain was because of the sexism? No, it doesn't. It may feel counterintuitive, but no. An example, we just have gendered insults. And just because the insult is gendered does not mean we are insulting because of the individual's gender. So that's not me disputing the pervasiveness of sexism or racism. It's just me noting that sometimes it can be hard to gauge how prevalent sexism and racism is. But moving on to the August numbers of Kamala Harris's support. So Black people were supporting her 27%. And then you see the next month, and her support across the board drops. But ironically, white people were where her numbers were the largest. Black people shrank all the way to 1%. And women and men, just a percent difference. Keep in mind, 5% margin of error. The next month rolls by, men 5% at the highest among those that support her, according to these Quinnipiac polls. And then November comes, Black people the highest. It doesn't stray from the margin of error. Frankly, they were all groups, women, men, Black, and white, were all basically on the same level in terms of equally not liking Kamala Harris. So if you were to just look at the numbers in regards to the voter sentiment of Kamala Harris, it's extremely hard to pull this racism and sexism allegation. Now, in any context of a woman or a Black woman or a Black man running for office, you're going to get a lot of sexism and racist comments in social media or from people in general. Frankly, that is because people, they're just a-holes everywhere. You're going to see it. If you're looking for it, you're going to find it. If you're not looking for it, you're going to find it. And if that, it's just going to be everywhere. But to say that sexism and racism is the reasoning why people deviated away from Kamala Harris so strongly, that's another claim. That's a claim that's hard to back up. Now, I guess next you would want to talk about the media. Well, maybe if we can't blame the voter population by themselves, we can blame the media, because that's where the average voter were getting their information intake was from the media. Well, maybe the media was behaving sexist and racist and emphasizing Kamala Harris's faults and not Pete Buttigieg's. Well, we're going to take a look at that claim. Does it hold water? Well, there's a number of things to consider. The media loved her early on. They loved her. February 2019, in an article from The Hill, they noted that Kamala Harris was their number one pick for who they believed would win the presidency. And this was followed by Biden, then Sanders, then Beto O'Rourke. And, Biden was still undeclared at that point. And I don't know if Buttigieg was declared or not at that point, but he did not crack the top 10. So, point being, in February, The Hill thought she was good enough to be ranked number one in terms of people that might win. And earlier before that, in a November 2018 article from Chris Cillizza, based on no data, picked Kamala Harris as the number one most likely to win. And this was wishful thinking. It was Kamala Harris number one, and Bernie Sanders was all the way at number 6. Okay, great. And CNN, they described their rationale as to why they believed that. They stated, Kamala Harris looks like the right fit for the 2020 Democratic presidential primary voter. She'll be well-funded. She's demonstrated her chops in high-profile tests, flashing her prosecutorial experience. She's the former California Attorney General during the confirmation hearings for Brett Kavanaugh. Harris has been seen as a 2020 candidate since the day she announced she was running for the Senate. It now only looks like she will make those expectations come true, but that she will start the race in a very strong position. So it referenced her, confirmation hearings during the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. Her statements during those hearings. And I looked at the statements. It's not that remarkable to me. She does mention, can you think of any instance where a man's body would be regulated in the way that women's bodies would be regulated in the case of abortion? Because Kavanaugh, or in the case of pro-life legislation, and Kavanaugh couldn't think of anything, and I guess that was amazing. It's a line I've heard so many times that it's not not disputing that it's something that needs to be said, but I'm disputing that it's remarkable. I don't see that as remarkable. And then Kamala Harris also said something about, would you say that the Charleston shootings, that both sides were to blame? This was a white supremacist attack. And would you think Trump's statement of saying, well, there's blame to go around, do you think that's accurate? And frankly, Kavanaugh made a reasonable response of saying, I'm not going to wade into political controversy. I believe that's a reasonable response. I mean, this is Supreme Court justice he was trying to become, right? It's very different from being senator, House representative, mayor, any other legislative position where it's your job to have an opinion and then to create legislation based off that. And at least in theory, if you're running if you are a judicial nominee, you're supposed to objectively interpret the law, not based off your own, what you believe. Now, I know that's just in theory, and that's not how it works at all. But in that context, it's a completely reasonable response. And I don't understand, lauding Kamala Harris over either of those two examples that I gave. And, I watched the hearing, even more of her statement beyond that, but that's what the two areas the media tended to focus on. And frankly, I don't know, I feel like it's low-hanging fruit in terms of smacking Brett Kavanaugh around, or the other examples that would be noted, Attorney General Barr, Trump nominees. Oh, she sure gave it to that Trump nominee. That is, to me, the lowest hanging fruit there is. Now, what's remarkable to me and what deserves praise is whenever you make an unpopular, deeply unpopular decision within your own party, within the status quo, and you take that position and you are vociferous of that with regards to that position. Now, that's bravery, and that's something that makes me go, wow. But when you're punching around Trump nominees, who cares? I mean, I'm glad you did it, but it's low-hanging fruit. It really is. And to make that your reasoning as to why this candidate is preferable, I don't know. That's how you think. I don't know, but, But in any event, other instances of individuals supporting Harris came from, or believing that Harris was likely going to be the nominee, came from the right wing as well. From Mira Adams of Real Clear Politics. She wrote that, or in her headline anyways, that this is why Kamala Harris will win the Democratic nomination. And this was written in January 2019, and all the reasons were rooted in identity politics. And Newt Gingrich, he wrote for Newsweek an article that suggested the same, were all identity politics oriented, all the reasonings. And then John Fund of the National Review wrote something similar. So conservatives believed it, establishment Democrats believed it, or at least those pundits that are more sympathetic to establishment Democrats. A lot of individuals were saying either, Harris is likely to win, or were tacitly kind of wanting it to happen because the media were singing her praises early on. So also, so maybe it wasn't the media. Maybe the media is not racist and sexist. Maybe it was the donors. The donors are sexist. This is from Forbes. They note that Buttigieg has 24 billionaire donors and Harris has 17. In third place is Biden with 13. But so donors were giving generously to Kamala Harris, is my point. And media was providing favorable coverage of her early on. Okay? And even immediately after her beating up on Joe Biden, granted, some in the establishment didn't like it because Joe Biden is also favored by the establishment, they still gave her enough praise where she surged. She surged incredibly. Almost even considering that margin of error with Joe Biden among black voters. That's how well she was liked. And nationally, national polls showed her spike as well. So media loved Kamala Harris, and donors loved Kamala Harris. And right-wing media were even acknowledging all this enthusiasm, gushing out of an identity politics-oriented establishment media. And said, yeah, she does have the most likely shot of winning the candidacy for the Democratic nominee. So, at some point in July, the media discovers she's a black woman, and they say, oh my gosh, we had no idea. If we'd known she was a black woman, we would have been totally racist and sexist and hammered her earlier, instead of singing her praises. I feel like it's very hard to reconcile the earlier enthusiasm that the media was expressing towards Kamala Harris with her not doing well later. I feel like it's reasonable to ask, why was Harris treated with more severity than Pete Buttigieg? But that in itself has explanations that we'll get to. First, let me explain that one of Kamala Harris's major defects that she had, that Pete Buttigieg did not have, was she was a attorney general. She was the top cop, as she liked to say, and she was a former prosecutor. And she was part of the status quo within the criminal justice system that black individuals are not so fond of, that disproportionately lock up black individuals for low-level crimes. That when each police shooting occurs, once again, the criminal justice system's treatment of black individuals is again under the limelight. And Kamala Harris, proudly called herself top cop, and the media reiterated this reference to herself. So let me read this from the New Yorker really quick. It's from July, amid this scrutiny that Harris was receiving that would eventually sink her numbers. But this is from the New Yorker on July 22nd. The criticism of Harris's past is twofold. That as an enforcer, she was excessively punitive, and as a reformer, she was too slow. In Smart on Crime, she boasts of tripling the numbers of offenders sent to state prison and substantially increasing conviction rates for drug dealers. In the Senate and on the campaign trail, Harris presents herself as a civil rights leader and a criminal justice reformer. She has called for higher pay for public defenders and is co-sponsoring legislation with Senator Rand Paul to address the cash bail system, an institution that many on the left argue criminalizes poverty. Alec Karakastanis, a civil rights lawyer I spoke with, complained for years when she had control over this exact issue, she crushed people with money bail amounts that were 5 times the national average. Rebecca Young, a senior trial attorney in the public defender's office in San Francisco, told me much of what she says is driven by political expediency, and that's why it becomes difficult to trust. We know she advocated for high bails around guns, drugs, around everything, frankly, but misdemeanors. In a recent interview on MSNBC, Harris called for mandatory independent reviews of police shootings, a practice she rejected as recently as 2016. It's a tale of two Kamalas. Brendan Woods, the public defender of Alameda County, the first African American to hold that position, says she was Attorney General when Black Lives Matter was taking hold and we were focusing on state brutality and state-sanctioned murder. She gave us silence. Now, by the time early August rolled around, keep in mind her numbers among the black community were 1%. Went from 27%. Criticisms like the article I just read to you were echoing everywhere about her prosecutorial record, and then she sinks to 1%. Now, let me note something real quick about the media. First of all, why would they criticize Harris, who they liked early on, so strongly while being so gentle with Pete Buttigieg? Well, keep in mind their numbers were different, right? I mean, first of all, the media just tended to push around the progressive left way more than the establishment. Now, with the debates going and different candidates getting in the spotlight, and for whatever reason, they make a splash, and then everybody's paying attention, and then also their negatives come into focus, and then media also focuses on those negatives. It sort of involves a contradiction on the media's part to be in love with a candidate and then also hammer away at them. And that relates to this desire for the establishment to succeed, or to not question or shake up the establishment, not challenge them too harshly, but then it also speaks to another behavior of the media, and that's juicy headlines and, frankly, sharp criticism of candidates, or very questionable, or criticism of questionable things those candidates did. Those make for juicy headlines, and that makes for advertising dollars. People tune in to your network. That network makes more money. The same with online digital media. So this contradiction exists, and I understand it's kind of odd. It's the same way kind of with Hillary Clinton. Media loves nothing more than to support her in a race versus her and Trump. But at the same time, they love kicking her around as well because it brings in revenue. So let me also read this article from The Economist. And it speaks more to Kamala Harris's behavior regarding Medicare for All and private insurance. The problem is less her debate performance than the muddled campaign she has run. Over the summer, she looked as if she could not decide whether she would win more votes as a progressive or moderate. That has led to some policy vacillations, most damagingly over health care. Initially, she backed the Medicare for All plan proposed by Mr. Sanders and endorsed by Ms. Warren, which would put all Americans onto government plans. But she reneged on that and produced a plan that preserved private insurance for some, that didn't have its intended effect of appealing to moderates and progressives alike. It left her looking opportunistic and uncommitted. Yes. But here's the thing. Buttigieg and Kamala Harris all flip-flopped on Medicare for All. They both went to some form of public option while still kind of calling it some version of Medicare for All. The difference between them is when asked in a debate, do you support abolishing private insurance? Did Buttigieg raise his hand and say yeah? No, it was Kamala Harris. And that's one example of how Kamala Harris would, she would take a position one day and then reverse the next day. Now, I realize Kamala Harris's reasoning was, well, I thought you meant take my personal private insurance away. But there were even instances before that where she made it sound like she wanted to throw the whole thing out, as she said. And though I realize the article from The Economist said the problem isn't her debate performance, it's her other behavior, her muddled campaign. Well, I halfway agree. Yeah, these muddled stances of hers being contradictory is part of the problem, but I do believe her debate performances were also weak. I know she was strong in that June performance, and I know she has had her moments where she is strong, but she has also had her moments where she's incredibly weak, like when Tulsi Gabbard. And this is an area where we can compare Buttigieg and Harris, right, as to stylistically how they are. Tulsi Gabbard challenges Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is dumbfounded. She doesn't know what to say. Tulsi Gabbard owned her. And then Tulsi Gabbard tries to do the same to Pete Buttigieg. And Pete Buttigieg, even though he did this dishonestly, and I did a whole video about it, he puts Tulsi Gabbard on defense and denies that he did anything wrong. But point is, optically, it made him look stronger. It made him look more confident. It made him look like he knew what he was doing in that debate, So it was just, there's a different style there. Kamala Harris also had this tendency to make strange little jokes, like, something about dude's gotta go. And then, comparing him to the small man behind the Wizard of Oz curtain, it was blatant, just attempts at applause lines, and felt disingenuous. And it really makes sense when you look at those debates and these silly little one-liners she does, the sincerity issue. On the one hand, you have her reversing her positions, trying to act like she's a progressive whenever she was historically had this status quo record as a prosecutor. So she's flipping and changing her identity, and meanwhile she's doing these bizarre one-liners to gather, this audience attention. So very disingenuous. In fact, whether this was well known or not, I don't know. But when she even stood up to Joe Biden in that late June debate, saying, "I was that little girl," referring to being that little girl that had to be segregated on buses because of people like Joe Biden supporting these states' rights legislation favored by Strom Thurmond. That's a mouthful. But she had the "I was that little girl" she had that line already on shirts ready to go. Now, if that isn't disingenuous, I don't know what is. So, it was a pre-planned moment. It was not organic. Don't wait a week and then make the damn shirts, But here's what her campaign has to say. And did her campaign say it was racism or sexism? No, they talked about the turmoil within their campaign, and they blamed a fella named Juan Rodriguez, and he was the campaign director. And they also blamed her sister that also had a role in her campaign. And let me just read this from the New York Times. This was days before she formally quit her campaign. And it reads, many of her own advisors are now pointing a finger directly at Ms. Harris. In interviews, several of them criticized her for going on the offensive against rivals, only to retreat, and for not firmly choosing a side in the party's ideological feud between liberals and moderates. She also created an organization with a campaign chairwoman, Maya Harris, who goes unchallenged in part because she is Ms. Harris's sister, and a manager. Mr. Rodriguez could not be replaced without likely triggering the resignations of the candidate's consulting team. Even at this late date, aides said it's unclear who's in charge of this campaign. And the article continues further down. Representative Marcia Fudge, who has endorsed Ms. Harris and is a front chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, said in an interview that the senator was an exceptional candidate who had been poorly served by some top staff and who must fire Mr. Rodriguez. But she also acknowledged that Ms. Harris bore a measure of responsibility for her problems. It's her campaign, and that the structure she created has not served her well. I have told her there needs to be a change, said Ms. Fudge, one of several women of color who have been delivering hard-to-hear advice to Ms. Harris in recent weeks. The weakness is at the top, and it's clearly Juan. He needs to take responsibility. That's where the buck stops. Now, Kamala Harris ended her campaign days later. Was it racism? Was it sexism? You decide. Hey guys, I hope you liked this video. Make sure, if you did, to click like down below and subscribe to this channel. And remember to click the bell. That way you'll get a notification whenever a new video is uploaded. Share this video with whoever you feel might find it valuable. And just remember, the more likes this video gets, the more views, and the more subscriptions, the more this channel can thrive and grow. Thank you.